host, Sabrina Salvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. Doobie-doobie-doo.
Doobie doobie doo. Hello, welcome. Happy Monday, everyone. Shout out to everyone watching on Rockfin, YouTube, and Twitter. What is going on? Guys, it is a busy night for streaming. There's a lot of streams going on. After my show, I recommend that you go over to Revolutionary Blackout Network and check out the Nick and CJ show. I'm not sure what they're talking about tonight, but I'm sure it'll be good. So I want to give a couple shout outs to people in the chat. What is going on? Hannah G says, I wonder how the Cuomo brothers' wives feel. That's a good point. I don't know. That's got to be a hard situation for them to go through. I honestly wonder how the children feel. Like, that's who I'm thinking about, because that can't be a good situation. I don't know if they're homeschooled, if they physically go to a school, but either way, you guys know kids can be mean and can bully, and I wonder how the kids feel. What's going on? CBC Voter says Panquake. Yes, we are still waiting for that to come out, CBC. We are still waiting for that to come out. What's going on? Dolores Piers says, hello, everyone. Greetings, Dolores. So nice to see you. What's going on? Holly Horn says, hello. Always a pleasure. Greetings. Sean M says, how many of y'all can believe we're already at the end of 2021 already? I can't believe it. I just realized how close I am to Christmas, and I haven't started Christmas shopping. I tried yesterday. I went to the mall and it was too many people and it made me feel really like anxious. So I left. What's going on? Creative Experiment says this is better than Jimmy's show. Creative Experiments? No. Oh man. Greetings. What's going on, Lawrence? Always a pleasure. Doobie doobie doo. Greetings, Eric Thomas, who's a Sabby member, says, hey there, Monday lefty friends. Shout out to Carlos Pena. Doobie doobie doo. Greetings. What's going on? RIP Mike Graval. Yo, I watched the entire discussion. Judith Butler and Dr. West did a tribute event for Dr. Edward, said years ago. Awesome. That is a good debate, you guys. It is long, but I am going to talk about that tonight. Greetings, Justin Johnson says, doobie doobie doo. What's going on? Alex says, condolences to Miss Fredo. Oh, man. Alex, man, what's going on? What's going on? Gore, son of none. Sabby Sabs, you are amazing lady. Bring perspective to the people. Thank you so much. That's really sweet. Aw. Hello, Michelita S. Hello from France. Shout out to the yellow vest. Shout out to the yellow vest. What is up? What is up? Greetings. She's black. It is at Creative is right. Oh, man. What's going on? Rick French says, hello. All right. Welcome to Sabby Sabs Podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sabby Sabs Podcast is a part of the Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Thursdays for the Roundtable and Friday for the Sabby Sabs Show. Catch me here Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. All right, guys, what are we talking about tonight? I want to go ahead and share my screen and show my thumbnail. I have 4 news stories tonight because one of them is actually pretty short, I think. So that's why I have 4 of them. Honestly, there were like 6 that I was trying to decide between. And I was like, oh, do I talk about this one? Do I talk about that one? It's been a big weekend for news, to be honest with you. So let me share my screen. All right, tonight we are talking about Cornell West debates Glenn Greenwald. That is the hot topic of the weekend. If you have not seen that debate, I think it's about 2 hours long, but it's very good, a good discussion. I actually understand where both of them are coming from. I'm going to get into that. We're also going to talk about Cuomo. I shouldn't laugh. I'm sorry. Chris Cuomo is fired. Now, last week I told you he was suspended. He is now fired from CNN. We're also going to talk about Mark Cuban buys a town. What is that about? And why did he do it? And last but not least, cop attacks man. That viral video on Twitter that's been going around. Of course, it happened in Minneapolis. What do you know? Go figure. It's like they've learned nothing from what happened with George Floyd. Nothing at all. And I'm interested to hear like what Amy Klobuchar has to say about that, to be honest with you. Let's go ahead and get into it. All right. So I want to start off with the debate that happened between Cornel West and Glenn Greenwald. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up. I don't know why it automatically plays volume. Like, that's kind of not cool. There are 2 points I want to highlight in this video. Let me go ahead and get to my starting point here. Doobie doobie doo. Man, I got myself saying it now. Okay, yeah, that's a good spot. So, long story short, let me go ahead and share my screen. So this happened over the weekend, and honestly, like I was like, man, how many people know that this is happening? Because I didn't see advertisement for it, but I actually found out about it because Glenn Greenwald posted it on Twitter, said, check out this debate between, and that's when I was like, wait, when did that happen? You know, so that's how I found out about it. I'm telling you, Twitter is like, can be a great resource sometimes. So this is the 2021 Holberg debate on identity politics. And there are some things said here by Glenn Greenwald and Cornel West. I actually don't side with one over the other. I understand where both of them are coming from. So I'm going to play what Glenn Greenwald, he goes first, what he says first. And then I'm going to comment on that. And then I'm going to play what Cornel West has to say about identity politics. So let me go ahead and mute my mic.
Polls show and legal changes show that increasing numbers of people do agree with that we're headed certainly in the right direction, whether fast enough or not. We're certainly, that's the progress we're making. And like any progress, it's generating some backlash, but I think even with that backlash, it's still on the right path. Where I think identity politics gets trickier and more problematic is when it ceases to be about ending those kinds of categorical privileges, and where the perception at least is, if not the reality, that it's about fortifying them, but maybe in different ways. In 2018, I interviewed Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez during her primary run against then Congressman Joe Crowley, and it was at the time when almost nobody knew who she was. I know it's impossible to believe there was ever a time in our lives when no one knew who AOC was, but I promise you, if there was, it was very recent. I interviewed her when she was unknown, and one of the questions I asked her, she was a young Latino woman challenging a white male incumbent. I asked her, what role should identity politics play in your election? What role should your race and his and your gender and his play in the decision that voters in this district make when deciding who they should send to Congress? What is your view on identity politics when it comes to those kind of questions? Should people vote for you because you're a Latino woman and he's a white male? And she said, look, my view of identity politics is, of course, diversity and representation matter, but the concern I have with it is that it's so often used as a deceitful Trojan horse, is what she called it, that status quo centers of power can recruit different faces that look like they represent change because they're on their surface more diverse, but in reality, they become tools to protect the status quo, to create a false perception that there has been a radical change, when in reality, they're actually there to strengthen the status quo. I think the election of Barack Obama in 2008 was perhaps the best illustration of that. Again, no decent person could have been anything other than emotionally moved on January 20th, 2009, to see him and Michelle and their two daughters walk into the White House, given the race of the United States. But then the next 8 years was very much a kind of continuation of the neoliberal order of the Democratic Party. It was a historic event in one case, but it not only didn't radically change much, but in a lot of ways, the appearance of that kind of change was weaponized to entrench the status quo further. And I think this has become an increasingly potent tool of institutions of authority. One of the most disturbing for me was 2 years after we did the Snowden reporting in 2013 and 2014, showing that Western intelligence agencies had instituted a program of mass surveillance. In 2015, the GCHQ, which is the British counterpart of the NSA.
Okay, so I'm going to stop there and I'm going to go ahead and comment really quick. So what's important to note here is that number one, I agree with what he just said. It's interesting that that message came from AOC, because AOC's campaign also, not her personally, but the press, some people in the press also used identity politics with her campaign as well. But it's good that she said that. And I do agree with Glenn here. The problem is, though, that now when you look at AOC, like now I feel like she's kind of embraced that more. Now she is that, someone mentioned it in the chat, like now she is that Trojan horse, right? But he's right here that like, this is a common thing that's done a lot by the Democratic Party. Like they'll put forth people like Barack Obama, Kamala Harris, for identity politics. And they'll focus on what they look like instead of their policies, instead of what they believe, instead of what they can get done. They did this heavily with Kamala Harris when she was running as president. And I felt like that was a lot of the focus. She could be the first female president. She'll be the first Black female president. She'll be the first Black / South Asian female president. That was heavily pumped out through mainstream media, especially CNN. They did the same thing with Barack Obama. He could be the first Black president. Like, and at a point, like, you have to stop and ask yourself, like, when do we focus on the issues? Yes, diversity is important. And I say this as someone who is DEI certified. Diversity is important. Diversity is a strength. But when you put people in just so you can say that you have diversity, it kind of like defeats the purpose of becoming like strong. Because, and I say that because if you're only focusing on what they look like and their tokenism, let's be real here, their tokenism, that's not diversity. I want to be very clear about that. Tokenism is not diversity. Again, I'm certified in DEI here. So for the people who will say things like, oh, we have diversity, we have a Black coworker on our team, and it'll be just one Black person, that's not diversity, that's tokenism. So the point that I want to get across here is that the Democrats do this a lot, and I'll be honest with you, it works. And then what happens is they'll put those figures, or we put those figures in office, and then people get upset with that representation because their policies are bad, because they're not doing the things that they ran on, because they're not fit for that position. And let's be real, I said this before, Kamala Harris was not ready to be vice president. She should have never been put into that position. But they were so focused on, like, Biden's campaign was so focused on identity politics. We need to get Black voters to come out. I'll pick a Black woman. And now that Black woman has an approval rating of 28%. You see what I'm saying? So I am all for diversity. I am all for representation. I want to be very clear about that. But what good is having the representation if the representation is not doing a good job? And that is something we need to stop and think about here, right? So when people say, well, you should be just happy that you have a Black female vice president, you should be happy about that, Sabrina. Okay. What's she doing? What is she? You know, I was thinking about this the other day because at the school that I work at, a while back, they hired or they put in a female dean. And it was the first time there was a female dean, right? And that's what everybody focused on. First female dean, first female dean. And she didn't do a good job. And she was put in this position. And then lo and behold, she wasn't even allowed to make decisions. People above her were telling her what to do, but when it was a man in that position, he was allowed to make decisions. So again, I said to my coworkers, what is the point of having a female dean if they're not even going to let her do anything? If all the men are going to be calling the shots, what's the point? Just so you can say that you have representation, you have to be careful with that because then it just becomes a numbers game. So everybody needs to have a voice. And it's very clear to me, I'm no fan of Kamala Harris, but it's very clear to me, it doesn't seem like Kamala Harris is doing anything. How many times do you see her speak? How many times? I told you she's always walking, just walking. See, most of the time you don't see her really doing anything. Right now, she's just the representation. So what is the point of putting people in these positions, in leadership roles, to have diversity if you're not even going to let them lead? Now I'm going to go back into the video because there's another point that he brings up, and this is at 103:52. There's another point that he brings up, 103:52, that I also think is incredibly important. So listen to what he says. He goes further on about identity politics, and then I'll go into Cornel West as well. What's going on? Delthea Simmons, a Sabby member, says, I'm not interested in a black president. I'm interested in a president that looks out for the interests of black people. Bingo. That's a big one. That's a big one. What's the saying, Delthea? All skin folk ain't kinfolk. It's true. Just because you have a black person in, that doesn't mean they're going to implement policies that are actually good for black people. And Obama did not do that. Let's be real here. Let's go back to 2008, the housing crisis, when all those black people lost their homes because Obama chose to bail out Wall Street. Now I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to get to the second part of this debate that I wanted to highlight as well. All right, let me mute my mic.
I just want to focus on for a second, which is noting the lack of women of color participating in this conversation and what impact that exclusion might have or that addition might have on the conversation. To me, this gives a really great window into the complexities of how we talk about identity politics. So you can certainly imagine that if you were to, we obviously have racial diversity and gender diversity and sexual orientation diversity and other kinds of diversity on the panel. It's true we don't have a woman of color. So how does that exclusion affect the discourse? How might its addition alter it? It depends a huge amount on which women of color you decided to integrate into the conversation. So we could, for example, imagine that we invited Kamala Harris or Stacey Abrams to participate in the conversation. They would be a woman of color. That would maybe change the conversation in a little bit of a way. Maybe it wouldn't. You could pick Nikki Haley or Tulsi Gabbard or Condoleezza Rice or Candace Owens, all women of color. That would probably change the conversation even more. And then you could pick,
Wouldn't just change it, brother. It would be more impoverished, but go right ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it'd be better or worse. In fact, that's exactly my argument,
I just
right?
want to be explicit about what the impact of it is.
Yeah, and maybe, and I think in some senses it may not have an impact, depending on who it was. And then you could imagine, for example, picking someone who isn't well known, who's somebody who's a single mother and unemployed, or works as a construction worker, as a police officer, who's a woman of color, who probably would bring a vastly different view than any of those other people that I named, and would change the conversation in much different ways as well. And so I think it's difficult to predict if you say, well, what would our conversation be like if we added a woman of color, because the range of views that a woman of color would bring would be so wide ranging depending on who they are and what their position in life is. And I think, one of the things that always interests me so much is if you look at elite discourse about, say, law and order and the police, and this kind of, slogan that arose in the last year from the murder of George Floyd, of defund the police and the like, that has a lot of currency among kind of elite guardians of discourse of all races. And then you look at polling data of poorer communities, Black communities, brown communities, and you say, do you think there should be fewer police in your communities, more police, or the same amount? The overwhelming majority of people in multiracial working class communities will say, I want the police in my community either as much as they are or more. And very, very few will say, I want fewer. And I think as well that when you look at the lack of diversity to the extent you want to analyze them in the panel, you can of course say, well, there's not a woman of color, but there's also not someone who, say, is a member of the working class. I grew up in a working class family.
Okay.
I grew up in a working class neighborhood, but let's be real. Let's be real about what our lives currently are. We're people who have spent a lot of time in elite academic institutions, who have a lot of career and economic stability.
That part right there. And that is very important. And that's the part I wanted to address. He brings up the class issue. And so in reference to Kamala Harris, like me personally, yeah, like what do I have in common with Kamala Harris? Okay, yes, both of us are Black women. Well, she's biracial, but Black women. But other than that, what else do I have in common with Kamala Harris? We are not of the same class. She's rich. I'm not. Like, she's on a political, she's in politics. I'm not. We sure as hell don't have the same political ideology. Like, other than that, what do we have in common? So he brings up the class issue, and I think that is very important. And this is why a lot of times you'll see me talk about class. Like on this channel, we talk about it on Revolutionary Blackout Network as well, because a friend of mine told me this one time when I was in college. White girl, grew up in predominantly Black neighborhood. And she would tell you, like, she grew up really poor. And you know what she told me? She said she had more in common with Black people in her neighborhood than she did with a white person who was middle class or a rich white person. Now you may wonder, how can that be? Class is a big deal. Because the thing is, I look at it like this. If you grow up poor, whether you're Black or white, you know about the struggle. You know what it's like to not be able to have 3 meals a day sometimes. You know what it's like to have to work paycheck to paycheck and knowing you have to get that next paycheck or you could be evicted. So the class commonality is very important. Like I said, me and Kamala Harris can sit in the same room at the same table. I don't really have much in common with her. And this is a mistake that people make sometimes. They think that just because Kamala is a cop, Sabby is not. Oh, there's that part too. This is the mistake people make sometimes. They think that just because two people are the same race, that they automatically are going to get along and they have a lot in common. Class divides people. We have a class divide in this country. Let's be real. And elite people hang out with elite people. Wealthy people hang out with wealthy people. And I'm glad that he brought that up. Now, he mentions the fact that there are no Black women on the panel. And so you didn't get to see everybody on the panel, but it's him, Cornel West, the gentleman that you saw there, and the woman, I forget her name, but the woman who is actually kind of leading the debate. You didn't get to see her in the video, but everyone is white on the panel except for Cornel West. There's one female. So I would say if you're going to put Black women on that panel, I would much rather see a Black woman who, I don't know, like is not high academic. And he brought that up as well. Like a lot of times in these spaces, and I'll use left media for an example. One of the things I noticed, and this is one of the reasons why I decided to do this, one of the things that I noticed was that it seemed like to me, a lot of times when I would watch a lot of these left independent media channels, number one, there were very few Black people on, but then when Black people would come on, it was always the same Black person. It was like someone who's elite academic, someone who's a scholar, someone who was, they've been in these political spaces. So a lot of times of the same class. I wouldn't turn on these channels and see someone like my comrades over at Revolutionary Blackout. Like imagine turning on, I don't know, TYT or Rising and seeing Rome on there or seeing a Finney on there. You see what I'm saying? That was something that I noticed and it bothered me. And I think that it's really important that you see, when we talk about diversity, we're not just talking about race, we're also talking about class. Because let's be real, people who grow up working class and are a part of the working class, their experiences are going to be different from people who are middle class and people who are wealthy. It's just the fact of the reality. And I think that is something that we need to see more of. And I've never been one of those people that's like, oh, I only want to bring someone on here if they're like a big name or they're a scholar or they're a theorist. You read this theory, man. Those people crack me up, by the way. I never wanted to be that person. And so you'll see me bring a wide range of people on here. Like Case Study QB's been on here. Max Blumenthal's been on here. Cynthia McKinney's been on here. Princess Blanding was on here. Renee was on here talking about the whole police like article that she wrote. So I think it's important that you hear from people who are from different walks of life. And don't just bring a Black person on just so that you can say you had a Black person. Because a lot of times, I feel like the working class in these spaces, they're not represented. They're just not, for the most part. Let's be real. We all seen it. I know I'm not alone. And I think you need to hear more of those voices. We need to hear from everybody. We need to hear from people. Like when Rome was telling me he grew up in Detroit and he watched them close 40 schools. You need to hear from people like that. You need to hear about their experience and what that's like. We're all different. Even over Revolutionary Blackout Network, we're Black, but we're different. We have different experiences. I grew up middle class. I also had to struggle as a young adult. I told you guys what happened in 2008. So I've been poor and I know what it's like. I'm still not rich. I still got a lot of fucking student loan debt. But I work in education. We don't make much. Just keeping it real. So you need to hear from all people. Like, I don't feel like someone has to have a college degree to be an expert at something. Because I've always said, to me, experience matters more. So it doesn't matter to me that you went to college and you got all these degrees, and I'm talking about myself here as well, that you got all these degrees. If I have the choice between that person and someone who, let's say I'm talking about public education system and schools being underfunded. Let's go with that one. That's a big topic for me. I like to talk about that a lot. I would rather bring on someone who actually went through that experience. I would rather bring on someone who, like Rome, like they saw these schools in their neighborhoods get knocked down. I would rather bring on someone who knows what it's like to go to those underfunded schools instead of someone who's like, yeah, I wrote this book and there's this theory about it. Because you can write a book, you can read theory, but to me, experience means so much more because you lived it. So that's just like my take on that. I'd rather hear from the people who have the experience, not the people who wrote about it and did not have that experience. Those are the people that we need to hear from more and more, because a lot of times it seems like there's people who are a part of the upper class who are speaking for working class people who never had to be working class and don't know what it's like from personal experience. They just know about it because they did this research and they were a professor and they wrote this book. I work at a university. I hear this stuff all the time. All the time. Faculty who try to tell me what it's like to be a poor Black person who also aren't even Black. It's hilarious to me. It's hilarious when I hear this stuff. Like, how are you going to tell me what it's like to be a Black woman and you're not Black? But people do it, right? So I'm glad that he brought up that point, the class issue that is very so important. Just because you have the racial diversity, if everybody on the panel, everybody sitting at the table is upper class, are you truly getting a diverse perspective? No, you're not. We need to hear from those people. Now, I'm going to go into what Cornel West says, and I like what he says here too. So let me go ahead and find my spot for that. All right, here we go. Share my screen. Share my screen. Oh, I have a lot to say about this. This is my field, guys. I have a lot to say about this. All right, let me go ahead and mute my mic.
But the suffering of other people without being a member of that group. You can have a deep concern without being a member of that group. So you're right about what kind of person it would be in that sense, and be able to make sure there's a variety of voices. I mean, that's what the Negro National Anthem is. The Black people lift every voice, not echo. We don't want extensions of echo chambers. We want quality voices, right? But quality voices is not reducible to one social position. It just isn't. So that on the one hand, I'm with Sister Judith in terms of making sure that we've got heterogeneity, variety, and diversity. But if we end up fetishizing diversity, then we end up with just a counting game. That's the last thing we want. I look at the world through these lenses. One fundamental question: how do we cultivate the capacity of the species to avoid self-destruction, given ecological catastrophe? That's a needful question. I don't care what color you are. I don't care what gender or sexual orientation you are. We don't have a planet that doesn't make a whole lot of difference what identity you have. The second is, how do we cultivate the capacity to preserve the best of democratic experiments that put poor and working people at the center, because we live in neo-fascist times and democracies are waning in terms of their substance. Those are fundamental questions. I don't care what color, gender, and so forth you are. And then the third is existential. How do you fight off despair and despondency and self-violation and self-destruction? Because we live in dim and grim and bleak times. One of the challenges of people who wake up, if you wake up and you see how dim things are, you might want to go back to sleep. Like Rumpelstiltskin, you see? Waking up is not the necessary sufficient conditions for being an agent of force for good at all. Not at all. And if you stay woke forever, you're going to suffer from insomnia. You got to fortify yourself and be a long distance runner in the quest for truth and beauty and goodness and so forth. So that it seems to me that when we talk about the lens through which we view things, all the talk about identity politics and cultural wars, they're going to have to adjust to how one defines things. You don't define it through those categories. And if those categories in the end don't meet the test, they need to be called into question. Even when we talk about white supremacy as identity politics, I can't accept that kind of neutered, sanitized, sterilized, deodorized language. White supremacy is barbaric. It is monstrous. It is calamitous. The Ku Klux Klan is not identity politics. These are gangsters who are lynching people. Let's just call it for what it is. You see, once we get into this kind of Orwellian talk of, well, you know, and they lynched so-and-so, that was an identity politics. No, that was thuggish behavior on behalf of people who hate people of color. Or the same was true with women, people who hate women. We have to use our language very explicitly here. And we can't pull back, but in doing that, we've got to keep alive the common ground of the overlap of our humanity. See, for me as a revolutionary Christian, that means that I got strong connections with revolutionary humanists, because we're talking about our humanity all the way down. And white supremacy is simply one particular barbaric way of perceiving the world that loses sight of the rich humanity of indigenous peoples and black peoples and brown peoples and so on. And let's just call it that. It's not identity politics in this vague sense. It's not even just cultural wars. You see.
Okay.
And so the real challenge becomes, how do we hold on to a language that's clear enough? There's always going to be some levels of obscurity in it, clear enough, and then test ourselves. And that's where I call into question the name calling and the finger pointing, because we all in some sense are complicitous with the ecological catastrophe.
Well said. Thank you so much. The Red Precarian. Yeah, the Red Precarian for the super chat. Barbara Ehrenreich came from the elite class and went undercover as an uneducated restaurant worker. She wrote a book called Nickel and Dimed and sold it and said it was impossible to live on those wages and that all work is skilled. Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I waited tables before. Like, you really got to work for those tips, honey. Let me tell you. Thanks so much for the super chat, the Red Precarian. There's something that he mentioned here that I want everyone to pay close attention to. If you notice, he said, what good, basically, long story short, what good is having like that diversity, those people in those places, if there's no plan? And this is something I feel like I've been saying for a long time. And this is why I say, like, don't just vote for someone because of identity politics. Don't idolize someone because of identity politics, because what happens is when you get caught in those bubbles, it's going to be difficult for you to recognize and acknowledge their mistakes. And a perfect example of that is Obama and Kamala Harris. Even till this day, there are people who will not admit the flaws of the Obama presidency, the mistakes that he made, the mistakes that Kamala Harris has made, will not admit it because they'll tell me, well, he's a black man or she's a black woman, so there's that. No, it's not just there's that. And this is the thing. This is why Democrats, mainstream media, they know identity politics works. That's why they sell it. And you have to be careful about that. You have to make sure you are not idolizing them, that you are not praising them and just seeing them as that person is the same skin color as me. They're black just like me. They're the first black woman. They're the first black man. So I can't criticize them. And I've had people say that to me, that they feel like they can't because of that. And this is where identity politics can become dangerous and tricky. I want to give you an example here. Let me pop out of here. All right. I want to give you an example in the workplace. And this is something I think people miss with diversity. We talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We do it in that order because if you do inclusion before equity, it says die. We don't want that. So it's DEI. So we talk about that. And one of the things that is often missed is that just because you have diversity, that doesn't mean you have a sense of belonging. Let me explain what I mean by that. After George Floyd, I've seen a lot of employers, companies hire diversity inclusion specialists. In fact, there were a lot of positions posted for that. All of a sudden, hey, we need diversity people because of what happened. That doesn't solve the problem, but that's another show, another time. But some of these companies, like, they didn't understand, and some of these offices didn't understand why they had difficulty getting diversity in their applicant pool, which I argue with that, but I'll get into that in a second. They didn't understand why they were not getting Black applicants. So these were offices and like companies that wanted diversity. They wanted to bring Black people in. So one of the problems that I noticed is that, number one, you have a system, and I'm speaking from higher ed here. You have a system, higher education, which is modeled after the United States government. And the United States government works for who? The United States government was designed to work for white men. If you go back and you read the Constitution, it was designed to work for white men. Then you have an education system, a college education system that was modeled after the United States government. So you have applicants coming in to interview for these positions. Let me tell you what goes wrong here. As a Black person, if I'm going to interview for a job, one of the things that always stands out to me if I'm the only Black person in the room and interviewing for a lot of these positions in higher ed, a lot of times you have to go to multiple interviews. Sometimes they're 2 hours long. I've done interviews before that were like 4 hours long and I had to do a presentation. But one of the things I'll notice is if there's no other Black people in this office, there's no other Black people on the team. Another thing I'll notice is if there's just that one Black person there, because sometimes they'll want to include one Black person so that you think that there is diversity. I don't fall for that. I've been on that side, so I know. Here's where the problem comes in. Let's say that person decides to accept the offer and gets the job. Okay, so now you have this office and you have 6 employees, all white. You just hired your 7th person and that person is Black. That's your diversity. Universities are notorious for this, by the way, especially the elite ones. That's your diversity. This is where they go wrong. Now that they have that one Black person, the next couple of people that they hire will not be Black. They'll think that they're all set because they have one. All they need is the one that they have diversity. And what tends to happen, and I can speak from personal experience, what tends to happen sometimes in those spaces is that the person that you brought in to give you that diversity oftentimes does not have a sense of belonging. What does that look like? It's things like the coworkers in that office going to lunch and not inviting the Black person. The coworkers in that office going out after work sometime for drinks, not inviting the Black person. The coworkers in that office not even speaking to the Black person, not chit-chatting with them, only talking to them when they have a work question. So what ends up happening sometimes is that employee that is giving you your diversity, your quota, they become a token. And when people are a token, they can feel it and they know it, and they do not have a sense of belonging. So diversity only works if there is a sense of belonging. If the people that you bring in to give you that diversity do not belong, feel like they have no belonging in that group, if they're not included, so you have to have the inclusion piece too. You also have the equity piece to make sure that they have the same resources that everybody else has, which sometimes that does not happen. I'm just going to be honest with you. You need all of those things for it to work. Employers don't understand that. Most of them don't, I'm telling you from experience. So for diversity to really work, you need all of those things. And you don't stop at the one. You don't get that one person and say, that's it, we got diversity, we're good. Because I'm going to tell you something. People do not like being a token. It is not a good feeling. You can feel it, you know it, you see it. So I think what's important is that, again, I will say this time and time again, I love diversity. Diversity is a strength, but people can tell when they're being added to something just to fill that diversity spot. And that is never good. I'm just going to tell you that is never good. We can talk about that in two. And I told you also in left independent media, same thing. Let's be real. I've told you guys there aren't many Black people in this space. Before me, before Revolutionary Blackout Network, there were maybe 4. There just weren't. And then the diversity pool in reference of who is brought on shows, like I said, usually when it is a Black person brought on, it is people in those spaces that Glenn Greenwald just mentioned to you. It's the people who are the academic elites. It is the people who are They've been in those political circles. Maybe they've been, maybe they ran for office themselves. That's a common one. They've run for Congress. They ran for Senate. And anybody outside of those categories, most of the time, you don't get to hear from. And that's a problem. And then this goes back to the class issue that Glenn Greenwald was talking about. What good is having diversity at the table if the person that you brought in at that table gives you the racial diversity, but they're a part of the same category as everybody sitting at the table? So-and-so went to Yale, so-and-so went to Stanford, so-and-so went to Princeton. This is our panel of people. I'm not saying we shouldn't hear from those people, but I am saying, like, I want to hear from everyday people. I want to hear from the guy that works at the grocery store down the street. I want to hear from the young woman that is a college student and has a part-time job and is trying to put herself through college. I want to hear from those people too. I want to hear from people. We talk about student loan debt. I want to hear from people who have student loan debt. I'm just being honest here. When we talk about the healthcare issue and medical debt, I want to hear from people who have medical debt. I want to hear from people who don't have health insurance, who are struggling to deal with it. I want to hear those voices too, because their voices matter. It should not just be those categories that we see so often. So-and-so wrote for The Intercept. So-and-so worked for the Wall Street Journal. So-and-so went to Yale. So-and-so wrote this book. So-and-so is a professor of theory at such and such university. That's all cool and everything. But I want to hear from the young man who has to run down the street and catch the bus to get to work. I want to hear from him too. I want to hear from the kids who have to go to these underfunded schools that we talk often about, so they can talk about the disparities at their school. I want to hear from them too. Not someone who just went there to take notes and record them and come back and deliver the message. When we talk about stop and frisk, and this is a big one, we talk about stop and frisk. David Serretta, look, he's a journalist. I get it. But when he came on, I believe it was Rising, he went on Rising to talk about stop and frisk. Okay, he's a journalist. He did his research. Okay. But at the same time, I want to hear from the kid down the street that has been stopped and frisked. You see what I'm saying? I want to hear those voices too. The people who have gone through the experience. Their voices matter as well. And that is the problem sometimes that we have. So if you say you want diversity and you're only looking at it as though we need the racial diversity, but then even with the racial diversity, you only bring in certain minorities from a certain class, or because they went to a certain school, or because they wrote a book, do you really have diversity? I don't know. Justin says, Sabby, would you consider Obama plus Harris our token president and vice president? Absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, when Cynthia McKinney came on, she said Obama was handpicked. That was already in the plan. Already in the plan. Thanks so much for the super chat, the Red Precarian. U.S. newspapers used to have a labor column. We should have people from the working poor on these panels, as well as middle class and homeless. Yes, thank you so much, the Red Precarian, for the super chat. That is true. This is why when we did the General Strike Summit over at Revolutionary Blackout Network, this is why Rome had brought on one of the Kellogg strikers. Actually, two of them, two different panels, but the Kellogg strikers. Because you need to hear from people. When we did the worker co-op session, that's why we brought on people who actually are a part of worker co-ops. People who started worker co-ops, not the person who wrote the book. You're going to learn the most from the people who have the experience. Just keeping it real. Just keeping it real. Harry said journalists used to be considered blue collar. That's true. This is true. Not these days. Harry, have you seen? Yeah, like some of these journalists are like millionaires. But to each his own. So what I thought was really interesting about this debate is I felt like this was the first time I saw a debate and I felt like, no, I agree with both of them. And I agreed with Glenn Greenwald and I agreed with Cornel West. And that was a new for me. That was a big new for me. Thanks so much, Eric. I'll read those afterwards. Just don't let me forget. So that's just how I look at this. And again, I am someone who is certified in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know what I'm talking about here. And I will tell you again, there's a difference between diversity and tokenism. And even with diversity, you have to have a sense of belonging. If you don't have a sense of belonging, it does not work. What happens is those people start to feel alienated, they feel left out, and they leave. And then those same groups will wonder why. Well, I don't know why we can't keep any black people. I don't know why. I don't know why we had a black person, but they left. Every time we get one, they leave. Oh, maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe there's a reason for that. I do not like this lipstick. Wow, I look like I'm about to do like Cruella de Vil here or something. Sorry, that was random. That was totally not part of the stream. Anyway, I'm going to go on to the second story. I'm sorry. I don't know why I brought that up. And sometimes I forget, like I'm like, people can see me like everything. I'm going to go on to the second story, which is Chris Cuomo. Now, I told you last week that he was suspended from CNN. He has now officially been fired, and not because of his involvement with Andrew Cuomo and him working behind the scenes to try to work with media to help out his brother. Not because of that, because something else happened. Here we go. Share my screen. Oh man, the Cuomos are not doing well, ladies and gentlemen. So, all right. Chris Cuomo is accused of sexual harassment days before CNN firing. So here we go. Told you it was something else. Days before CNN fired Chris Cuomo for his alleged role in defending his brother from sexual harassment claims, the younger brother of disgraced former Governor Andrew Cuomo had himself been accused of similar behavior. A lawyer from his accuser said Sunday. Attorney Deborah Katz told the Associated Press that she had a client who was the victim of serious sexual misconduct by Cuomo, and that she had contacted CNN about the woman's allegations on Wednesday after the network suspended its star correspondent. CNN officials had said additional information has come to light in announcing the anchor's firing on Saturday, but did not provide details. And that's when I heard about it. It was Saturday, and they said more information has come to their attention, but they didn't say what the information was. And I was like, oh, come on. You can't hide that from us, right? All right. It goes on to say the alleged victim said through her attorney that she was inspired to come forward after hearing Chris Cuomo tell viewers he cared deeply about such issues. Hearing the hypocrisy of Chris Cuomo's on-air words and disgusted by his efforts to try to discredit these women, my client retained counsel to report his serious sexual misconduct against her. When he was suspended, Cuomo said it hurt, but that he understood the network's move. The direct allegations against him had not yet surfaced at that time. And also here, Chris Cuomo leaves his Sirius XM radio show amid scandal days after CNN firing. Let me come out. So It seems like to me there is a problem in the family. We have Andrew Cuomo sexually harassing women. We have Chris Cuomo sexually harassing women. I see a pattern here, a pattern of behavior. And quite frankly, I don't want to say I'm surprised. I wouldn't put this past anybody. I'm just saying I'm not like surprised, but it is really interesting to me that someone who had the number one show, if I'm not mistaken, he had the number one show on CNN, high profile, that he would even attempt to do that, knowing how high profile he is, knowing what could happen if it comes out. Now, I don't know everything that he did to this young woman. I don't know everything that he said to her either, but it makes the network look bad because also Don Lemon is also accused of sexual misconduct too. I think that trial should be coming soon. Look, I don't know what's going on at CNN, but it is very clear to me that I think the Cuomos are used to having power. I think they're used to being in power. And I've said this before, people that have power sometimes abuse it. And a lot of times they can get away with it. And this is one of those examples where it did not happen. Now, I told you guys way back when Andrew resigned, I told you way back then that I thought that Chris Cuomo should have stepped down from CNN. You can go back and find that video. That was a couple months ago. He didn't do that. And here he is today. Not saying it wouldn't have come out anyway, but still, I did not think it was right for him to still be at CNN, knowing that he was his brother's advisor through all this. And at that time, it was mentioned that he was his brother's advisor. I didn't feel like that was good. I thought that was a conflict of interest. You are on the number one show on CNN. CNN is a 24-hour news network. You're not going to skew things in favor of your brother and you're his advisor. So for me personally, I just feel like, am I glad that he's fired? Yes. Do I think that he's learned from this? No. And I'm going to show you why. And this just goes to show you the ego, the level of ego, the obliviousness. Like, he's just so oblivious here. And I don't know who approved this tweet, who approved this statement, but should not have gone out. And I'm going to show you why. This was Chris Cuomo's statement after it was announced that he was fired. Ladies and gentlemen, listen to this. This is not how I want my time at CNN to end. But I have already told you why and how I helped my brother. Asshole. So let me now say, as disappointing as this is, I could not be more proud of the team at Cuomo Prime Time and the work we did as CNN's number one show in the most competitive time slot. Ego. I owe them all and will miss that group of special people who did really important work. Ladies and gentlemen, where the hell is the apology? Hello. He didn't even say sorry. Not even, I regret my actions. Nothing. In fact, this entire statement is just talking about his body of work. This is not how I want to spend my time at CNN. Well, you shouldn't have been sexually harassing people, jackass. I mean, are we kidding here? But I've already told you why and how I helped my brother. Didn't tell everything. They found more documents. So let me now say, as disappointing as this is, I could not be more proud of the team at Cuomo Prime. What the fuck you bringing up the team for? Leave them out of this. They are not involved. Do not bring them into your situation. This is all about you and what you did and the work we did as CNN number one show in the most competitive time slot. Now is not the time for bragging. Like, who approved the statement? Now is not the time for you to brag, dude. You just got fired for sexual harassment. And obviously, they must have enough evidence to be like, yeah, you got to go. And you're going to brag that you had the number one show. That does not matter right now. This primetime show, this competitive slot, none of that matters right now. What matters is that you were sexually harassing women, particularly this one woman who filed the claim. And that is what he should be addressing in this statement, not his body of work. Do you guys see the ego? Like, it's just, I owe them all and we'll miss that. I owe them all. No, you owe the woman who you were sexually harassing. What the, and we'll miss that group of special people who did really important work. I laugh at the important work part for CNN because you guys tell lies to people every day. So we have an ego problem. He doesn't seem to think he did anything wrong. Did you guys pick that up from that message? He doesn't seem to think he did anything wrong. He didn't even mention it. I'm going to go to some of the comments in the chat. Lauren said he is sorry that we don't understand. Eric said Chris Cuomo is very important to Chris Cuomo. Desert Mantis said he probably doesn't regret his actions. It just, like, is there like a PR person, like at CNN? Like, does he not have like an advisor, a PR person, or somebody who approved this statement before it went out? Morioki says Chris Cuomo went on national television and said he beat the 1-9 by doing chest exercises and stretching. Don't look for more. He's nutty. Like, what kind of it? I mean, this is a good one, Miguel. CNN equals Cuomo not needed. I mean, hell, even his brother apologized. I thought his apology was kind of lame too, but at least he apologized. He didn't even apologize. Valerie says Cuomo means sexual predator in Italian. You guys remember when Andrew Cuomo tried to use that excuse and say that it's because he's like, I'm Italian. This is what we do. And I was like, no, boo. I have Italian people in my family and they don't go around doing that. I just don't. Bill Bradley said, I'm sorry and I'm seeking help to better myself and address my defects. How hard is that one sentence apology for these rich fucks? Yes, thank you. Hello. It just, I don't know. Delthea Simmons said, y'all need to stop trying to end the greatest love affair ever between Chris Cuomo and himself. He's fired, but let's not be mistaken here. He'll probably get a job somewhere else. Maybe another network. Maybe not right now, but I'm pretty sure like he'll probably do something like get his own podcast or something. He'll probably get signed by Spotify. Who knows? Like, whoa, let me stop. I might be giving him ideas. Stop. But and CNN was already like struggling with ratings. They're already struggling with ratings after Trump lost. It has not been a good year for the Cuomo. It has not been a good year. That was a terrible statement. Absolutely ridiculous. Going on to my next story, I don't want to give that man any more attention. Like, that was just the horrible. When I saw that he issued a statement, I was like, oh, good. At least he's going to apologize. He's finally going to say, no. Delthea Simmons, Sabby Sabs member for 5 months. Awesome. Congrats, Delthea. I want regular people to be in the room, but not just to tell their story and then sit down. I want those people in on policy planning too. That's right. Well said. Well said. Yeah. Got to have everybody. Don't just give people a seat at the table. They need to also have a voice. Got to do both, but got to do both. I don't know, dude. I don't know. Let me share my screen. I told you guys back then, I told you he should have stepped down. All right, this is the third story we're going into. Like, Mark Cuban did something really bizarre. So out of nowhere, Mark Cuban, he decided to buy a town in Texas. Mark Cuban buys a small town in Texas just because. Listen to this, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, I don't want to play that. Go away. Go away.
Reportedly worth an estimated $4 billion.
I don't care what he's worth. Okay, sorry. Mark Cuban, owner of the Dallas Mavericks, is having a Johnny Rose moment. The billionaire just bought the entire town of Mustang, Texas, a blip on the map off I-45 with a population of 21 people. All right, guys, before I go on, a population of 21 people. What does he need this town for? Cam said people buying towns nowadays. Yeah, what is going on? We got Bill Gates who's buying up all this land. Mark Cuban is buying a town. We got billionaires out there just buying up land. And so what is going on, guys? What is going on? I want to bring this to your attention because we need to know about this. Why are they buying up this land? What is their plan? It goes on to say the reason Cuban told Dallas Morning News a buddy needed to sell it. Like, what? I don't know what, if anything, I will do with it. What? Cuban told the paper, Mustang is pretty much a 77-acre blank canvas for Cuban. The town was founded in the early 1970s when it was known mostly as a local watering hole in an otherwise dry Navarro County. These days, there's little more than a trailer park and a strip club, Whispers Cabaret, which is reportedly in despair. On Friday, Google Maps showed the name of the club had been edited to Mark Cabaret. Oh boy. The town also features a resident alligator in one of its ponds. What? Dallas real estate broker Mike Turner told the Morning News. Nearby attractions, well, you've got Dallas about 45 minutes north, and a history buffs with a penchant for cult lore will be pleased to find that the city of Waco, just over an hour's drive southwest of Mustang, and just 2 miles from Whispers, there's Navarro County, first and only vineyard and winery. It's not clear what Cuban paid for the town, but for someone with a net worth of nearly $6 billion, it was almost certainly a steal. The town was reportedly put up for sale in 2017 for $4 million, but Turner said it was overpriced, even when they slashed the listing price in half. So we have Mark Cuban here just buying a town. Told you so himself. He doesn't even know what he's going to do with it. He just because he can, just because he has the money. Imagine if Mark Cuban and Bill Gates got together and decided to use that money to end homelessness in this country. Imagine if he took that town and Bill Gates, all the land that he's buying, and said, let's build a bunch of housing units for homeless people so that everyone can have a home. We have plenty of land in this country, and they can live there. What if they did something like that? But no, instead, we have Mark Cuban buying a town that has 21 people in it, and he doesn't even know what he's going to do with it. He could just buy it just because he's rich. Hey, I got this money. There's this town for sale. I think I'm just going to buy it. Just like that. Just like that. Jared said they could save countless children from starving to death if they cared about lives. Like, what is going to happen? What is going to happen? Miguel said Gates and Cubans be like, where's the profit in helping the homeless? That's a good point. But still, these guys are billionaires. They're not going to spend all this money in their lifetime. Valerie said, I'm not far from there. Oh dear, Valerie. Valerie might hop over to Mustang, check out what's going on. So I just don't, it's just when I see people like Mark Cuban, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, these men are so rich and wealthy. And I see them like all the despairs that people are going through in this country right now. And I see them just take their money and like, Jeff Bezos is like, I'm going to space. Never mind all the people who are struggling to get employment in this country after the pandemic. Never mind all the people who are food insecure and housing insecure in this country. Instead of taking that money and putting it towards something good, they're taking that money and just buying stuff just to expand their wealth and continue to expand their wealth. Now, some people may come in and say, hey, Sabby, Bill Gates gives a lot of money to charity. Yes, honey. And he also gets to write it off. It's a tax write-off. Again, that benefits him. A lot of times when you see them donating to some of these charities, there's usually something in it for them. It just... Thanks for the super chat, Delthea Simmons. Billionaires need to be taxed out of existence. Yes, Virginia, you can have too many dollars and not one bit of sense. Thank you so much for the super chat, Delthea. Like, I would feel guilty. Maybe that's just me. I would feel guilty if I had all that money and I see what's happening in this country, especially last year. I would feel really guilty going to space. Like, what? Like, how? I don't know. I don't understand. I just don't. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't know. Little Rock Elevator said, next you'll see the remaining sharks from Shark Tank buying towns, especially Kevin O'Leary. All these people go together, man. Doesn't even know what he wants to do with it. I just got this extra money and I don't know what I'm going to do. So I'm going to drop a couple million on this town that has 21 people. I don't really have a plan for the town or anything, but yeah, I'm just going to do it because I can. Eric Thomas says more rich equals more sociopath. Oh, I don't know. Alex said, I'm pretty sure you have to sacrifice a few morals before you reach your first billion. Some people who got to those places, like people like Oprah, did some things to some people to get where they are. Not everybody got there the honest way. Just keeping it real. So I wanted us to make sure that we're paying attention to all of these rich people who are just buying towns and land right now, which is just suspicious to me, considering everything that's going on, how people are struggling, how people are food insecure and housing insecure. Let me go buy some land in towns. Gore said, billionaires, let's put them on a boat. Oh, let's put them on a boat. Billionaires, let's send them out to sea. Let's sink the fucking boat. Go buy a town. I don't know. Going into my final story tonight, guys. Now, this one went viral on Twitter. I'm going to read the article and then I'm going to show you the video because Minneapolis Police Department police officers have not learned anything, it seems like, from what has happened with George Floyd. Minneapolis police reviewing arrest in which officer tossed 64-year-old black man to the ground. An Instagram video is bringing attention to a Minneapolis police officer's arrest of a 64-year-old black man at a grocery store on Wednesday evening in the Ventura Village neighborhood. In the almost 5-minute video, Officer Christopher Lang is seen aggressively grabbing Troy Lee Billups and pushing him on the ground in an attempt to arrest him. This was around 6:05 p.m. near the wall along entrances and exits inside of Aldi. The person recording the video was heard telling Officer Lang that it was two people having a conversation together, and you decided to escalate that situation by shoving him. The video, which has over 60,000 views as of Thursday night, appears to show at least 4 people near the scene. Bystanders are heard expressing disbelief and yelling at the officer out of concern for Billups. Those are the quotes from the video. I'll get into the video. I'm going to come down here. Minneapolis police said the matter is being evaluated by the Office of Police Conduct Review. I don't think there's really much to evaluate. I'm going to show you the video and you tell me if there's something that needs to be evaluated. Department policy and training continues to emphasize the importance of de-escalation efforts to stabilize and resolve situations when safe and feasible. Now, here comes the video. Because based on what I saw in this video, I didn't think there was that much more that needs to be evaluated. But here we go. Let me...
Fuck is this de-escalating?
Oh, hold on. Sorry. Let me pop out. All right, let me share my screen. Because when I saw this, I was like, did they really push? Like, this is like an older man. Like, they've learned nothing. Nothing. Here we go. Let me mute my mic.
Right now. Don't put your hands on me. You're out. What are you doing? You're supposed to de-escalate. How is this de-escalating? How the fuck is this de-escalating, dog? What are you doing? What's your badge number? Badge number, bitch. What are you doing? What are you doing? Why is he under arrest? Why is he under arrest? He did nothing. He did nothing for this.
Why you put your hands on me? That's why.
How?
From what? From what? From what?
Watching that cart's not enough for you? Watching that shopping cart's not enough for you? No, you escalated the situation. You escalated the situation and you made this happen. It's clear. It's clear as day. You escalated the situation. It's two people having a conversation with each other and you decided to escalate the situation by shoving him.
Let me go. Let me go. Let me go. Let me go. I didn't touch you. I didn't touch you.
So if they don't kiss the ring, they're arrested. If they don't kiss the ring, they're arrested, basically, right?
Let me go.
If they don't kiss the ring, they're arrested.
Let me go. Let me go. All I said, you keep your hands off me. That's all I do.
Officer, you're not de-escalating.
You gotta keep your hands off of him.
What's going on between
You
you?
It don't matter.
Nothing happened?
Nothing happened.
Did you pay for this stuff?
Yes. You don't put your hands on me.
We're gonna go talk outside. You pay for yourself. Nothing happened.
You don't put your hands on those young kids. You don't do that.
Excuse me. Let me slide by you. Real quick. Let me make sure. I'm gonna go this way because he's gonna hurt that man. He's gonna hurt that man for no fucking reason.
Now that's part one of the video. There's a second part to the video. Notice at the end of that video, he was asking him, did you pay for your stuff? And the man says, yes. Shouldn't that question have come at the beginning of the altercation? Shouldn't the police officer have asked him that question first before he threw him down and decided to tackle him? I don't know. I'm not a police officer here, but it just seems like to me, what is happening a lot of times is these police officers, they are reacting first and then they want to ask questions later instead of asking the question first and then saying, okay, all he had to do was ask him, did you pay for your stuff? No, he didn't. He escalated the situation. And you can hear the guy in the video saying that. You're escalating. You're supposed to de-escalate. This is Minneapolis police. There's a second part of this video I want to play here. Let me pause it. Mute my mic.
I told you, don't you take it. That's all I said. I didn't put my hands on
I'm right here.
You should have put your hands on me. We weren't fighting. We was talking. We weren't pushing. We didn't touch each other. I just said, don't put your hands on me. You cannot put your hands on me. No, you can't. Not without just reason. I didn't cuss at you.
Hold up. Did you hear what he just said? The man said, you cannot put your hands on me. The police officer said, yes, I can. The gentleman said, no, you cannot without just reason. And the police officer again said, yes, I can. See what I was saying? This is the mentality that they have. This is the mindset that the police force has. And it's not even a one officer problem. It's the system. They think that they can do these things because, like I said, qualified immunity. They know there's no accountability. For the most part, there's no accountability. So you just heard the police officer tell him that, yes, he could. This is what they think. This is how they believe. They think they can do what they want to people. I'll let the video continue to play.
Officer, come on. You literally escalated the situation. They were talking to each other. No pushing happened until you pushed them. No one pushed anything until you pushed them. I was standing right there. No one pushed anyone until you pushed them, officer. Come on.
My shoulders. No. You know, man, what's wrong with you? Hey, girl, what's your name?
Oh dear, oh God, let's grab that bottle of hot sauce. We can't let that hot sauce drop and break on the ground. We have to save the hot sauce. Don't save the man who was being pushed to the ground. Don't save the gentleman who was attacked by the police officer, but God forbid this hot sauce bottle hits the ground.
Tell me your name.
Yeah.
Troy Lee Billups.
Troy Lee Billups?
Yes.
Spell your last name for me.
Billups.
All right.
What are you arresting for? For what? I didn't do nothing.
Officer K. Lang, I believe.
I didn't do nothing. All I did is told him don't touch the kid.
Back up. Yes, you are.
Now they're interfering because they typing up. I didn't do nothing.
Back up.
And you know I didn't do nothing.
That officer K. Lang,
What's
right
gonna
there.
beat me up?
Officer Lang,
What you
right
gonna do,
there.
kill me?
Escalated the
Gonna kill
situation.
me?
Officer Lang escalated the situation. This man was having a conversation with someone else. No pushing, no shoving, no physical interaction occurred until Officer Lang initiated the physical action as seen in this video.
You're terrible.
Hey, I'm not on the store location, bro. I'm making sure that they good.
And so I don't know if you heard what the gentleman who's recording the video, what he said towards the end there. He said no physical altercation occurred until the officer showed up. He was the one who became physical. And this is oftentimes what happens with the police. And I've said this time and time again. A lot of times they come into situations and they make the situation worse than it was before they got there. They do not know how to de-escalate a damn thing. They make things worse. Based on what I saw, there's no reason that guy should have been tackled. I don't understand why this guy is being arrested. And then there's the lack of respect here. Shoved a 64-year-old black man to the ground. The lack of respect. You heard him. He said, you cannot put your hands on me. Yes, I can. You cannot put your hands on me without just cause. And the police officer said, yes, he can. What does that say about the system? But see, when we talk about defunding the police, oh, and by the way, there's going to be a part 2. Garland Nixon was on here last week. There's going to be a part 2 next week with Garland Nixon and Socialist MMA. I think I'm going to have to just be a moderator for that panel. I'll just let them duke it out. That should be really good. When we talk about defunding the police, people are like, no, you can't take the money from the cops because the cops got to save us from the criminals. Even though police officers only solve 0.02% crime. Most of the time, they're the problem. They make things worse. They escalate the situation. They create drama when there doesn't need to be any half the time. They're the problem. And I've seen this time and time again. We talk about defunding the police. And some of you may have seen this. If you have not, here we go. Now, there was a group of activists that came up with the list of demands. Now, this was after George Floyd. Socialist MMA was one of those activists. People are like, what's the plan? Number 1, 10 demands for justice. Number 1, defund the police and reallocate resources to impacted communities. Number 2, demilitarize the police. By the way, if you click on these, you can see the details for each one. Number 3, eliminate discriminatory policing, prosecution, and sentencing. They have a video for each one, by the way. Number 4, institute complete law enforcement transparency and accountability. Number 5, independently investigate all police crimes and abuses of power. Number 6, install community representation, oversight, and safety measures. Number 7, end strategic counter-protest violence. 8, apologize and provide reparations. 9, end the war on drugs, which is still a problem. 10, end carceral punishment. Now, these are the demands. And these are the activists who came up with this. Anya, Awkward, Cheyenne, Jen, Nick, who you guys know as Socialist MMA on Twitter, Patrona, and Zoya. Just a group of young activists coming up with a plan. Now do you see why we want you to defund the police? Because that officer just told you that right after that gentleman said, you cannot put your hands on me without just cause, that officer just told you, yes, I can. Now, this is Minneapolis Police Department, right in Minnesota. Where is Amy Klobuchar? I want to remind everybody that Amy Klobuchar was aware of Derek Chauvin's behavior. Because the incident with George Floyd, that wasn't the first time Derek Chauvin has done police brutality. He had several complaints. The way he treated Black people and Indigenous people. Amy Klobuchar knew about that. Amy Klobuchar didn't do anything about it. This is something I want people to remember when she's up for election again. Because when it comes to the police brutality situation in Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar has not been present. She has not been good on that issue. Now, I'm not in Minnesota, so I can't vote there. But if you are there and you are watching this, that is something that I want you to remember. Hit that like button, guys. I'm going to go to some of the comments in the chat. Overnight said kids have grown up for generations seeing this. It's effing disgusting. Terrible. 64-year-old man. I still remember last year after George Floyd. This was in Buffalo, New York. Police officers shoved, I think that man was like, I think he was in his 80s. Shoved an 80-year-old man's head into the ground. They don't care. They don't care. And I don't think that this is something that can be reformed. We've already tried that. I told you body cams were a part of police reform. Police officers turned them off. There's no reform in this at this point. You got a lot of bad apples and you have a rotten tree. You got to cut the tree down and you need to grow a new one. That's how I see it. Thank goodness for cell phones, right? Thank goodness for cameras on our cell phones, because there was a time when cell phones didn't have cameras and we couldn't catch these incidents on video. It was just word of mouth. And if people even wanted to believe you or not. The message that I want to get across to people is that this isn't something that's new. This has been going on for a long time. It just was not on camera. That is why you see it more. That's why you hear about it more. Because it's on film. I'm going to go to some of the comments on Rockfin. But they have got to go. Someone was asking me one time, like, well, wouldn't you call the police if this happened? No. Look, I will call you guys before I call the police. Because a lot of times what happens, you call the police, especially if you're black, you call the police, they show up to your house, your apartment, you call them to complain about something, they ask if they can come in. By the way, if they ask you that, you do not have to let them in. If they do not have a warrant, just FYI. They come in, they start looking around, they see something else. Oh, I see there's drug paraphernalia over there. What you got over here? What you got over here? What's going on? What's in this? What's in that? Then there you go. All right. I am going to give a shout out to Roger Meadows. I hope my volume is off on this. Okay. Take away auto scroll. Doobie-doobie-doo. Thanks so much, Roger Meadows, for the tip on Rockfin. We at Co-op had a Zoom meeting with the New York State Senator. I had arranged on how we can grow, not just Co-op Ride statewide, but cooperatives in general statewide, to add some real competition to corporate New York. Meeting was very productive. The other members talked about issues regarding making disability rides simpler for drivers and not so stressful. I talked about how public banking could be beneficial to drivers because its primary task is to build infrastructure, and told her the difference between driving where I live in the suburbs and driving in the city are two different things. Yes. Yes. Two different things. And your car knows it. Yes. All the potholes that I hit. A public bank to finance infrastructure to make every street in New York City as smooth as 8th Avenue will be a cost saving to drivers. No more bent rims. I've been there. Broken axles. Yep. Front ends gone bad, as well as the founder kept having his internet go out. So you knew I had to use that as an opportunity of why we need eminent domain over our broadband infrastructure statewide. She was more than for it and wants to help push for it. But overall, it was very productive. This won't be the last meeting, just the beginning. All right, Roger. Everyone give a big congrats and shout out to Roger. I hate that I had to get at Reverend Will Barber and a whole bunch of people to agree with me for a comment defending Kamala. People need to back off saying Vice President Harris needs to back off Vice President Harris. Oh, yeah, I remember he made that comment. She's a powerful woman. She's a powerful Black woman. She's been given some of the toughest political assignments in the face of two Dem senators who, under the lie of being so-called moderates, have blocked 15-hour minimum wage, voting rights, etc. Yeah, I am hypothesizing here, Sab, but tell me if I am in the ballpark. We have become ashamed of our working class roots by guess who? Our grand and great grandfathers. Remember when Ados came out of slavery? We came out with a lot of work with your hand skills that we adopted to every time technology advanced, going from carpentry and then plumbing and then electrical. However, this was at the cost of having a third grade education, where higher education wasn't emphasized back then. Our paternal ancestors since 1865 were good with hands but couldn't read or write. Therefore, they placed heavy emphasis on their children getting an education, telling us, don't be like me, an ignorant, uneducated man. I want you to go beyond and be smart, and people will value your mind so you can be respected. This Sab is the origin of tying blue collar work with your hands, know how with being uneducated, which has been passed down. That is a good point, Roger. That I'm glad you said that. That's a really good point, because along the way we've made it seem like if someone has a blue collar job, that means they're uneducated. That's not necessarily the case. Just because someone's working a blue collar job, that doesn't mean that they didn't finish high school. That doesn't mean they didn't go to college, because you have people that graduate from undergrad and still will have a blue collar job. So you're right about that, Roger. This is what led to us fleeing those Home Depot skills for higher ed, which does nothing for you when you're out of a job. Unlike a blue collar job where I can never not have someone's plumbing who needs fixing. Cosby told a story of when he was young and trying to figure out what he wanted to do in life, and he wasn't doing good academically. And a counselor told him maybe he might want to explore auto mechanics. And he said that the counselor thought that he wasn't intelligent. He took it as the counselor thought he wasn't intelligent, with him being not smart enough. So he doubled down on his academics. You see how offended he was to be associated with blue collars? Well, don't get me started on Bill Cosby. I have no studies to back that up, but I just have a feeling that being part of the community and knowing your community as to why I call it a hypothesis. But Sab, you tell me, can you find a black plumber, electrician, okay, maybe a mechanic? What about home improvement brother? And does that hypothesis sound sound? No, I can't actually. In fact, every time someone has come to fix something, they've been white every time. I never thought about that. That's a good point. Good point, Roger. Billionaire and former Walmart president Mark Lore helped outline a plan for a $400 billion metropolis, tabbed the new city in America to be built in the desert, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, Texas, Idaho, or Appalachia, if properly funded. I hope I pronounced Appalachia correctly. Cuban, the town is already built and is a small town. This billionaire bloodsucker wants to build an entire metropolis. 2 days ago was the anniversary of the assassination of the great freedom fighter. I won't say who. I don't want to get anyone in trouble. I know you're talking about with anyone, but yet qualified immunity is still here. I'm glad New York City got rid of it, and I'm trying to get it done at the state level, city by city, state by state, until finally the country. I saw a violation of the First, Fourth, and Eighth Amendment. Here is something to add to that reform police list. I don't think the police knows the Constitution. That should be part of the job requirement. Thank you so much for the tips and those comments, Roger Meadows. Yeah. Well said. Well said. Well, guys, I hope all of you learned something here tonight. I realize it is 8:39, so I'm a little bit over my time. Definitely head over to Revolutionary Blackout Network and check out the Nick and CJ show and see what they are up to. And I will be back tomorrow. But other than that, have a good night. Keep up the fight.